The irenic compact survey ship. Harmonious inquiry coasted through the black reef between stars, its spectral sails drinking the faint glow of a dying nebula. Aboard the vessel, Ambassador Sarith of the Luminari stood before the command pool, his slender form bathed in cool radiance as he watched the translation glyphs ripple across the liquid display. A signal had arrived, faint, repetitive, and achingly fragile. It pulsed from a system the compact's charts had long marked as empty, a lonely G-type sun with a single terrestrial world sitting inside a green belt of habitability. The message looped every 11 standard minutes, a digital whisper that the linguistic suite finally cracked into recognizable syntax. New Aurora Colony, Sarith murmured, tasting the words, containment nominal. Do not approach. Cathar, the ship's Karathi pilot, swiveled from his crash couch and flicked a tongue over one eye. That's a strange greeting, sounds more like a warning than a welcome. Sarith allowed himself a pulse of quiet exhilaration, a new sapient species. The compact had not encountered an emergent civilization in 4 centuries. Every council species still remembered the long loneliness before the great concordance, and every first contact since had been a deliberate, joyous affair. Hope bloomed across the bridge like sunrise on 100 allied worlds. The message's second layer unspooled. More data, the senders called themselves human, bipedal, carbon-based, oxygen breathing. Their radio emissions placed them at roughly tier 6 on the Kardashev ladder, early interplanetary, perhaps on the cusp of true starflight. No threat, nothing the harmonious inquiry could not handle. The phrasing must be a translation artifact, Sarith decided, his empathic field casting a soothing amber wave toward the crew. They've been alone out here. Caution is natural, but they called for contact. We answer. Cathar rumbled a laugh. Karathi clutch. Mothers say the best friendships start with someone shouting, stay away, let's go make friends. The ship folded distance and entered the system 6 hours later. The world that resolved on the main viewer stole breath from even the stoic. Sarith, sapphire oceans embraced continents furred with emerald vegetation. Cloud spirals danced in the upper atmosphere. It was the kind of place that made diplomats weep with the beauty of possibility. Then they hit the atmosphere. Every communication array died in the same microsecond. The ship's graceful descent turned into a screaming, unpowered plummet as something in the air fouled the intake manifolds. Sarith clung to the anchor pillar as Cathar fought the helm, shedding altitude with brute force rather than finesse. The emergency thrusters kicked in only after they pierced a thick band of pale particulate that coated the hull like a living film. What in the endless dark was that? Cathar hissed. The sensors rebooted sluggishly. One reading made Sarith's luminous veins constrict. The air outside was saturated with organic motes, spores, trillions of them. They hung in the troposphere as a near-invisible blizzard, each speck vibrating at a frequency that the ship's systems identified as biologically active. On the surface, the colony's white domes glinted in perfect formation. No movement, no thermal signatures except the faint hum of a single power source. The looping transmission was still broadcasting, clearer now that they were inside its envelope. Containment nominal, the voice repeated. It was a human female, her Tone stripped of emotion, do not approach, containment is all that remains, do not approach. Keitha's scales flushed a nervous gray. Sarith, that's not a distress call. That's a warning beacon. Sarith stared at the pristine, silent colony, hope curdling in his chest. He refused to let it die. There is one active stasis signature. One survivor. We did not come all this way to flee at the first sign of trouble. Suit up, we're going outside. The airlock opened onto a world holding its breath, and the drifting dust began to stir. Part 2, the silent colony. The environmental suits sealed with a soft hiss as Sarith, Keitha, and 2 armored crew members stepped onto the surface. Pale particles around their boots, never quite settling. The sky was a muted pearl, the sun reduced to a diffuse smear, and the quiet felt physical, as if the very atmosphere had been stuffed with cotton. New Aurora stretched before them in geometric perfection. Alabaster domes, connected by covered walkways, a central plaza ringed by dormant hydroponic towers and landing pads marked with faded human script. Nothing was broken. Nothing was weathered. The colony could have been abandoned yesterday, yet the data logs would later prove it had been silent for over 70 standard years. Keitha kept his weapon unholstered. I've walked through tombs that felt more welcoming. They followed the power signature to the largest dome, its seal still holding. Sarith interfaced with the door mechanism, and his empathic senses recoiled. The panel was layered with residual emotion, not fear, but resignation. Thousands of human touches, each one carrying the same heavy acceptance of an ugly duty. The interior was a command center. Holographic displays flickered to life as they entered, and Sarith accessed the main terminal. The translation suite worked quickly, unspooling the colony's records. New Aurora had been founded as a medical research outpost specializing in neurological pathogens. 87 years of peaceful work, then a breach, a classified project called Phoenix Spore, a fungal organism engineered to interface with sentient neural architecture. The record's tone shifted from clinical to desperate in the span of 3 entries: quarantine protocols, volunteer wardens, a vote unanimous to remain and ensure the spore never left the planet. The final log entry, dated 72 years ago, was a single sentence: we've contained the outbreak, but the Phoenix dreams, and we are its dreamers. Turn back. Sarith's hope withered into something cold. This was not a colony awaiting rescue, it was a self-made prison. Sarith Cathar's voice cut through. I found the stasis chamber. The adjoining room was circular, its walls lined with cryopods. Most were empty or dark. One glowed with a steady cyan light. Inside, suspended in a translucent gel, floated an elderly human female. Deep scars ran down her left cheek and neck. Her thin hands clutched a data slate against her chest. A monitor on the pod's exterior read, "Monitor alive. Do not wake unless the spore speaks." Sarith hesitated only a moment. We need answers. Revive her. The pod drained with a liquid sigh. Woman's chest heaved and her eyes snapped open, gray irises flecked with gold, utterly lucid. She tumbled forward into Cathar's startled grasp, coughing out cryofluid before Sarith could offer a greeting. The woman grabbed his arm with shocking strength. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped in heavily accented compact standard, the language the beacon had translated. Her voice was dry as old paper. The spore is listening. It's been listening since your ship broke the sky. Outside the dome, the drifting motes were no longer drifting. They were gathering ribbons of pale dust, converged above the plaza, weaving together into shapes that stood on two legs and began to walk. Sareth watched the external feed and felt his luminescent heart stutter. The shapes were human, or had been. Now, they were something else, stitched from spores and memory, and they were coming toward the dome with a single, synchronized purpose. "My name is Alara Vance," the woman said, pulling herself upright, "and you have just woken up the Phoenix." Part 3: The Phoenix Spore. Alara Vance did not waste time on gentleness. She moved through the command center with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in suspended dreams, reactivating dormant systems while Sareth and Cathar scrambled to follow. "The Phoenix Spore is a neurological assimilator," she explained, her scarred face lit by a tactical map of the colony, engineered during a human conflict that never reached your stars. Airborne, adaptive, it infects the limbic system first, then overrides identity. The original hosts become nodes in a planetary consciousness. We built it as a weapon and it became a nightmare. Cathar's tail lashed. "You made a plague that eats minds." "We made a lot of things," Alara said, without flinching. "The difference is we clean up our messes." She pulled up a schematic of the colony. A vast mycelial network threaded the entire planetary crust, the spores, physical brain. The drifting particles were its sensory organs. The animated corpses outside were its puppets. The ship had triggered a dormant alert, and now the hive mind was fully awake and intensely curious about the new visitors. Sareth felt a psychic pressure building at the edges of his empathic field, a vast alien curiosity that was not hostile, simply hungry. "We can leave. The ship can burn through the spore layer. Your ship's hull is already laced with HFY," Alara said flatly. "The moment you try to break atmosphere, the spore will seize your flight systems. It wants to spread. You're the first off-world transport it's seen in 7 decades. She turned to face them, and for the first time Sareth saw the exhaustion beneath the steel. "I'm the last monitor." The others gave themselves to the spore over the years, one by one, adding their wills to the containment barrier. "I've been holding the line alone. Your arrival broke my concentration." Outside, the puppet forms had reached the dome. They did not claw or batter. They simply pressed against the walls, mouths working silently, and where they touched, pale filaments began to spread across the structure like veins. "There is a failsafe," Alara said. She pulled a small injector from a cabinet and pressed it against her own neck. Golden fluid hissed into her carotid. "The Warden serum. It forces a controlled symbiotic infection. It will let me interface with the spore directly and fight it from inside. I can buy you time to reach the long-range transmitter on the colony's edge. Warn the compact. Make sure no one else comes here." "You'll die," Sareth said. "I've been dead since the day I agreed to be the monitor." She met his eyes, and her expression was not grim, it was serene. "This is what we do. Go." She walked toward the airlock as the first mycelial tendrils punched through the dome seals. The serum was already working. Her veins glowed gold beneath her skin, and her posture shifted into something predatory. The door cycled open and Alara Vane stepped out to face the horde. "Phoenix," she shouted into the swirling dust, "you want to talk to me." The spore cloud convulsed and every puppet turned its head toward her. Part 4: The Warden's Sacrifice. The transformation was brutal and beautiful. Alara's body erupted with golden hyphae weaving around her limbs. Like organic armor, her spine elongated. Her fingers cracked into talons of chitin and light, and her eyes became twin furnaces. She was no longer a frail elder. She was a warden, a walking bastion of human will fused with the very organism she sought to contain. She tore into the first wave of puppets with a sound that was half roar, half hymn. Fungal limbs were severed and resevered, the spore's constructs collapsing into inert dust each time her strikes disrupted their neural connection. But for every form she destroyed, 10 more shambled out of the drifting haze, and the pressure of the hive mind grew heavier with each passing moment. Inside the dome, Sarethas and Cathar sprinted toward the transmitter array. The corridors were overrun with pale tendrils that retracted at their approach as if the spore was too preoccupied to bother with them. Sareth risked a glance at a wall-mounted monitor that showed the external feed. Alara stood at the center of a hurricane of spore and flesh, her warden form blazing. She was not merely fighting. She was speaking. Her lips moved in silent negotiation, and the hive mind's presence pulsed in response. "She's bargaining with it," Sareth breathed. "She's offering herself as a permanent mind node if it lets us leave." Cathar shouldered open a jammed hatch. "Then we don't waste her offer." They reached the transmitter, a tall spire at the colony's perimeter. Cathar's claws flew across the interface, locking the type beam array onto the nearest compact relay station. Sareth composed the message in a raw, unfiltered burst: "Quarantine, do not approach, biocontainment failure on world designated New Aurora, species human, threat level existential, do not approach." The signal screamed into the void. On the monitor, the scene shifted. The spore's avatar rose. It erupted from the ground in the central plaza, a colossal amalgam of mycelium, bone, and the absorbed memories of 4,000 dead colonists. It had no fixed shape, only a shifting mountain of faces and limbs, a tower of stolen consciousness. Its voice was a chorus of every voice it had ever consumed, and it reverberated through the colony's very stone. "The warden has bargained," it boomed. "But the bargain is void. New minds approach, new minds will join the Phoenix." Sareth felt his own empathic field crushed beneath the entity's psychic weight. Cathar staggered, his reptilian eyes rolling back. The avatar's shadow fell over the distant dome where Alara made her stand, and the golden light of her warden form flickered. "She cannot hold it alone," Sarethas whispered. But Alara's voice crackled over the colony's internal comms, distorted and doubled as if two people were speaking at once. "I'm already inside it, Sarethas. Listen, there is a way." The colony was built on a thermobaric charge. The spore's core is right beneath the central plaza. If you detonate it from the ship's engineering, override the thermal pulse with vaporize the mycelial network before it can launch spores into orbit, but someone has to trigger it manually. The remote systems are dead. Cathar was already moving. "I'll do it." "Cathar," Sarethas began. The Karathi gave him a look that was Older than space flight, you're the ambassador, you carry the warning home. I'm the pilot, I fly us into the fire. Part 5, The Human's Bargain. The avatar of the Phoenix Spore turned its thousand-eyed attention toward the landing site as Cathar sprinted across the plaza. His personal shield flared against the constant barrage of spore-laden wind. But the motes were patient, they found seams in his armor, microscopic gaps, and began to worm inside. Sarethas ran for the ship, his slender form a streak of light through the poisoned air. Alara's dual voice guided him through the harmonious inquiries, emergency protocols, step by agonizing step. She was no longer a separate entity. She was a cancer inside the spore's consciousness, a splinter of defiance that the hive mind could not excise without damaging its own neural architecture. The thermobaric device is called Sunfall. She transmitted, her voice clearer now, as if speaking from a great distance inside a storm. It was designed to sterilize the entire colony footprint. The blast radius is 50 km. Your ship needs to be at least 60 km up when it triggers. Cathar won't make it out, Sarif said as he climbed into the cockpit and began the ignition sequence. Spore filaments crawled across the viewport, weaving intricate death patterns. He knows, Alara said. He's already told you. On the external audio, Cathar's breathing was ragged. He had reached the fissure the avatar had torn in the plaza, a chasm that plunged straight into the glowing, pulsing heart of the mycelial network. The core was a mass of neural tissue the size of a small mountain, throbbing with stolen thought. The thermobaric charge lay dormant. Beneath it, a human-made iron box, covered in warnings in 3 languages. I see the trigger, Cathar reported. Manual crank and a dead man's switch. Very human design. They didn't trust anything electronic around this thing, because the spore can interface with electronics. Alara explained. It learns. It adapts. Everything we brought to this planet it eventually absorbed, except that. Cathar descended into the chasm, his shield flickering. The avatar above him screamed in a million dissonant octaves and tried to collapse the walls, but Alara's internal assault disrupted its control. She was pouring all of her remaining will into the hive mind, forcing it to experience confusion, doubt, emotions it had never known before. Absorbing human minds, the spore was learning fear. Sarif lifted the ship off the ground. The engine's cough spore fouled exhaust, but the thrust held. He rose through the pale haze, watching the plaza shrink below. Cathar's vital signs oscillated wildly. The spore was inside his body, now threading through his nervous system, whispering promises of unity. It's very persuasive, Cathar grunted. It says I'll never be alone again. Tempting, really. A wet, pained laugh, but I'm Karasi. We were never meant to be alone. We chose to be together. Big difference. He reached the iron box and began to turn the crank. The avatar howled. The entire planet shuddered. Part 6, The Fire of Absolution. Cathar's claws slipped on the crank as his muscles began to betray him. The spore had reached his motor cortex, threading pale filaments through the gray matter, but his reptilian physiology fought with a stubbornness born of 1 billion years of survival. He was cold-blooded. The spore's metabolic invasion was slower in his tissues, and that sliver of extra time was all he needed. The crank locked into place with a resonant clunk. A 5-second countdown began to beep from the device, and a dead man switch primed. If Cathar released pressure, the detonation would happen instantly. If he held it, he controlled the moment. Sareth, he said, his voice steady, despite the tendrils threading through his throat. Get clear. I'll hold the switch until you're at altitude. Sareth's hands trembled on the helm controls. Cathar, there must be another way. There never was, you know that. Cathar's laugh was soft, full of Karathi warmth. Tell my clutch I died making a difference. That's the best end any of us can ask for. The harmonious inquiry punched through the spore layer and into the black of near space. Sareth watched the chronometer counting seconds. The ship's sensors tracked Cathar's vitals as they flickered and dimmed. The spore's avatar loomed over the chasm, trying to crush the interloper, but Alara's golden presence flared inside its mind like a nova. You wanted to understand humanity. Alara's voice resonated through the hive network, now a single pure note. This is what we are. We burn our own gardens to keep the weeds from spreading. We stand watch over our worst mistakes for decades, centuries, until someone comes to take the burden. No one came, so we burn. The countdown hit 0. Cathar let go of the switch. A column of white fire erupted from the planet's crust, vaporizing the plaza, the chasm, the avatar, and the entire mycelial network in a single expanding sphere of plasma. The shockwave spread across the continent at supersonic speed, boiling oceans and cracking tectonic plates. From orbit, it looked like a star being born, then dying in the space of a heartbeat. The spore screamed. It was a psychic death cry that lanced across space and slammed into Sareth's empathic senses like a physical blow. He screamed with it, feeling billions of interconnected minds wink out, feeling the vast loneliness of an entity that had never asked to exist but had hungered only for connection. And then silence. A final transmission crawled through the static, faint and fragile. Alara's voice, stripped of distortion, sounding exactly as she must have sounded 70 years ago, tired, proud, and utterly at peace. Tell them Earth's children keep their promises. The phoenix's ash. The signal died. The planet below was a molten ruin, and the harmonious inquiry drifted alone through the debris of hope. Part 7. The Warning and the Legacy. The High Council of the Irenic Compact convened in the Chamber of Voices, a vast hall where representatives of 17 species gathered beneath a dome that projected the galaxy in real time. Sareth stood at the center, his luminescence dimmed to morning gray, and delivered his report. He spared no detail. The colony, the Phoenix spore, Alara Vaints, Cathar's final charge, the fire that consumed a world to prevent a nightmare from touching the stars. The council listened in utter stillness. And when Sareth finished, the silence stretched long enough to become a wound. Counselor Mjarth of the Thulvani, an ancient species known for its unshakable calm, spoke first. You are telling us that this species, humanity, engineered a bioweapon capable of assimilating all sentient life. And then when it escaped, they quarantined themselves for 7 decades rather than allow it to spread. Yes, Sareth said. And when the containment was breached, they detonated their own colony, sacrificing themselves without appeal for rescue. Yes. Mjarth's crystalline tones faltered. This is not the behavior of a nascent civilization. This is the behavior of wardens or executioners. The debate that followed was anguished and fractured. Some species advocated immediate isolation of Earth's entire sector. A few, more fearful, whispered of preemptive sterilization. Sarath listened to it all, and when the calls for eradication grew loudest, he stepped forward and played the final archive. Alara Vance's testament filled the chamber. She spoke the names of all 4,823 colonists who had chosen to stay and guard the spore. She described their lives, their hopes, their quiet acceptance, and she ended with words that stripped the council of its certainties. We do not seek forgiveness. We do not ask for understanding. We only ensure that our darkness never touches the stars. If you are hearing this, then our watch is over and we have kept our promise. Judge us as you will, but know that humanity does not abandon its post. The council trembled. No vote for eradication passed. Instead, a resolution was drafted. Human space would be marked as a permanent quarantine zone. No contact, no approach, no provocation. Not out of hatred, but out of a terrified respect for a species that had proven capable of creating apocalypses and equally capable of chaining them. Sarif returned to his quarters aboard a new ship, the Harmonious Inquiry, having been decommissioned due to spore contamination. He stood before a star map where a tiny red marker now glowed over the Sol system. He recorded a personal log, his voice hoarse with an emotion he could not name. We found hope and it turned to terror. But within that terror I witnessed the strength that could protect the galaxy or annihilate it. The humans do not know we exist. They may never know, and yet their legend has already begun, written in ash and sacrifice. He reached out and touched the red marker, feeling its cold weight. Cathar called them wardens of their own monsters. Alara proved it with her final breath. I no longer know if we should fear them or admire them, perhaps both. Perhaps that is the truest response to beings who walk so willingly into the fire. Somewhere in the dark, on a blue world, unaware of the terror it had inspired, humanity went about its fragile, ferocious existence, and the galaxy, having glimpsed the shape of what slept in Sol, turned its eyes away and hoped never to wake it.